You won't believe how far some HOA board members will go, especially when they think they're above the law. In today's story, a neighborhood tyrant better known as HOA Karen took things way too far. She tried to bully me with fake rules, trespass on my property, and when I pushed back legally, her husband claimed she was just following the rules. But when the cops showed up, it was her getting cuffed. And wait till you hear what was in the court order I handed them. This one has drama, deception, and the sweet taste of justice. Stick around. It's a story you're not going to want to miss. And if you enjoyed this one, be sure to click subscribe, because tomorrow, we have another special story for you. It started with cookies. That's how Karen reeled me in. I'd just moved into a quiet little cul-de-sac that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a real estate commercial. Perfect hedges, matching mailboxes, neighbors who wave with just the right amount of forced cheer. The kind of place where your Amazon packages are safer than your social life. So when a woman showed up at my door, holding a Tupperware container and smiling like she ran the Stepford Wives fan club, I thought, all right, maybe this place won't be so bad. I'm Karen, she said. Welcome. I'm on the HOA board. I help keep things orderly around here. You ever hear a sentence and your stomach just does a little spin? That was the moment I should have backed away slowly and closed the door. But I didn't. I smiled, said thanks, and took the cookies. Big mistake. They were oatmeal raisin. Strike one. She launched into a whole spiel about community standards and how we pride ourselves on uniformity. Apparently, trash bins had to be rolled out no earlier than 6 a.m. Grass trimmed to under 2.5 inches. And don't even think about painting your mailbox off-white. Only regulation white was allowed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Still, I figured every neighborhood has its quirks. I'd lived next to a guy who practiced yodeling every Saturday morning back in college, so how bad could this be? I smiled, nodded, and tried to be the friendly new neighbor. That lasted about a week. It started with my trash can. I'd rolled it out the night before pickup because I had an early meeting the next day. The next morning, there was a bright orange warning sticker slapped on it with the words, HOA, violation premature placement. Premature. What was this? Trash bin? Puberty? Then, it was my lawn. I'd gone out of town for 2 days, and when I got back, Karen was on her hands and knees, measuring my grass with a literal ruler. I stood there in my driveway, blinking like an idiot while she jotted something down in a little black notebook. You're half an inch over, she said without looking up. Just a friendly reminder. Yeah, friendly like a tax audit. The real kicker came when I painted my front door navy blue. Not neon green. Not graffiti art. Navy blue. A color so boring it's practically beige with an ego. 2 days later, I got a typed letter in my mailbox saying the door clashed with the visual harmony of the neighborhood, and that it needed to be returned to approved HOA white. I didn't even know HOA white was a color, but apparently, Karen did. I started asking around, hey, do you have a copy of the HOA rules? I'd ask my neighbors. Most of them shrugged. A few said Karen handled all of that. One guy whispered, we just do what she says. It's easier. That's when I realized something was off. She talked a big game about the HOA, but there was never any paperwork. No official welcome packet, no meetings, no elections. Just Karen, standing in her driveway with a clipboard like a suburban dictator. I tried ignoring her. I really did. But she was always there, watching, taking notes, filing violations. One day I caught her snapping a photo of my backyard through the side gate. That's when I stopped playing nice. Because if there's one thing I can't stand, it's someone making up rules just to feel powerful and then hiding behind fake authority when they get called out. I didn't know exactly what she was doing yet, but I knew I was going to find out. And when I did, oh, Karen was in for a surprise. I knew I was in trouble the moment Karen rang my doorbell holding a measuring tape like it was a weapon. By then, she'd already moved past passive-aggressive notes and straight into full-on suburban surveillance mode. You know how some people have ring cameras? Karen was the ring camera. She had this uncanny ability to appear exactly when you were about to do anything that she didn't like. The first incident that made me question my entire life choice was when I parked my work van in my own driveway. You'd think I had summoned Satan himself. Karen appeared within 10 minutes, arms folded, eyebrows raised like she was auditioning for the role of neighborhood menace in a bad Hallmark movie. "We don't allow commercial vehicles to be parked overnight," she said, like she was reading from a sacred scroll. "It disrupts the visual consistency of the block." Visual consistency. The van was gray. The driveway was gray. I was wearing gray. Honestly, I thought I was the visual consistency. I asked her to show me the rule. She said, "It's in the HOA handbook." Problem was, I still hadn't seen this mysterious handbook. Every time I asked, she'd brush me off with a "check your welcome" packet, which didn't exist, or say it was being updated. Updated by who? The ghost of condo boards passed. Then came the flagpole incident. I put up a small American flag, nothing flashy, just a standard-sized one near my porch. 2 days later, I found another violation notice, this time slipped under my doormat. Apparently, my flag was too large and created an unnecessary focal point. God forbid my house have a focal point that wasn't Karen's rage. Her husband, Davor, as I started calling him, Dollar Store Dan, Crenshaw, got involved around this time. He'd glare at me whenever we passed, like I'd personally insulted his golf swing. One morning, I caught him sneaking photos of my front yard from behind a bush. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Documenting neighborhood decay." I wish I was kidding. It didn't stop there. They started issuing threats. Karen said she'd escalate things legally if I didn't comply with the van, the flag, and get this, my front garden. A little garden I'd planted with lavender, some succulents, and a bird bath that a squirrel fell into once. So, technically, it was a squirrel bath. But still, she taped a letter to my door, demanding I restore the lawn to pre-approved landscaping standards. It read like a cease and desist letter written by someone who binge-watched up many court dramas and didn't quite understand how law works. That was my tipping point. It wasn't just annoying anymore. It was targeted, strategic. A weird campaign to push me out, or at least grind me down into HOA compliant submission. But here's the thing. I'm not the grind-down type, so I started asking questions. I talked to other neighbors. One's Karen hadn't already converted into her private neighborhood watch. One guy told me he'd lived there 6 years and had never seen an HOA meeting. Another said he stopped paying dues years ago, and no one followed up. A third whispered like we were in a spy movie and said, "We just let her feel like she's in charge. It's easier that way." Easier maybe, but definitely not legal. That's when the idea hit me. What if this whole HOA thing wasn't even real? What if Karen had made up the rules just to boss people around and no one had ever challenged her? That would explain the lack of documents, the mysterious handbook updates, the violations that only she seemed to notice. So I did what any rational, slightly over-caffeinated person with a chip on their shoulder would do. I started digging, and what I found. Let's just say Karen picked the wrong neighbor to play HOA tyrant with. Turns out, all it takes to unravel a suburban dictatorship is one very late night, a pot of black coffee, and a questionable Google search history. I started with the basics: county property records. A lot of boring PDFs and forms that looked like they hadn't been updated since dial-up was a thing, but tucked between the legalese and outdated web design. I found something interesting. My property wasn't listed under any active HOA. In fact, there was a note saying, "Exempt from HOA jurisdiction as per subdivision ruling 12 years ago. 12 years. That's longer than most celebrity marriages. I kept digging. I looked up the official HOA registration. Surprise, there wasn't one, at least not one that applied to my street. Apparently, the original HOA dissolved years ago after a failed vote to raise dues for a neighborhood fountain that never happened. But Karen, she'd been acting like she was queen of the HOA ever since. Next, I called the county clerk's office. Very friendly lady named Diane confirmed it. No registered HOA currently governs my property. I asked if someone could just say, they're in an HOA and still find people. No, she laughed. That's called fraud. So there it was. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was freelancing her tyranny, dressing it up in laminated notices and pretending she had power that literally didn't exist. It was like a kid playing cop with a toy badge X. This kid was slapping fake fines on real mailboxes. I needed backup. So I got a real lawyer. Not some TV ad guy with a Bluetooth earpiece. A solid small-town attorney who'd probably seen his fair share of HOA nonsense. I showed him the letters, the warnings, even the passive-aggressive notes written in Comic Sans. He didn't laugh, but he did raise one eyebrow and say, "Yeah, that's not how any of this works." He helped me file a formal cease and desist letter against Karen and her HOA, but the cherry on top, a court-issued document and official order affirming that my property was not, in any way, under HOA authority. Signed, stamped, sealed. Boom. I printed out 3 copies. One for Karen, one for the sheriff's office, and one to frame bake. Petty victory deserves a little flair. I didn't even try to hide it. The next morning, I walked right up to Karen's house and handed her the envelope. She opened it on the porch, skimmed a few lines, then laughed. "Oh, this again," she said. "You know, these online forms aren't legally binding." Online forms? Lady, this had a judge's signature on it. I didn't argue. I just said, "You've been warned," and walked away. 2 days later, I came home to find Karen in my front yard. Again, this time, she was yelling about my freshly painted fence being non-regulation beige. Not even a weird color. Beige. Like the most boring, safest color in human history. I guess it clashed with her rage. She stepped right onto my property, waving her clipboard around like she was Gandalf banning the color taupe. "I'm issuing one final violation before the board escalates this matter." I looked at her, then looked at the imaginary board she was always referencing. At this point, I figured it was just her and a Pinterest board full of fencing ideas. That's when I did something I hadn't done before. I called the police. I wasn't being dramatic. She'd stepped onto private property after being told not to, and she was threatening fake legal action. That's trespassing and harassment. The officer who showed up was calm, professional, and clearly not a fan of HOA drama. I handed him the court order. He read it carefully, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "this document says you have no legal authority here. You're not part of a registered HOA." Karen went pale. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like she was buffering. But, I'm just following the rules," she stammered. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Whose rules?" That's when her husband stormed out of the house. "She's just doing what's right. You think you can move here and change everything?" I stayed quiet. The court order spoke louder than I ever could. The officer asked Karen to step aside for questioning, and for once, she didn't argue. And me, I stood there, watching the self-declared queen of the neighborhood finally realize her crown was made of paper. It started quietly, no sirens, no drama, just the crunch of tires on my driveway, and 2 officers stepping out of a patrol car like they were there to deliver Amazon packages. Not justice.com, clean, professional, which, honestly, made what came next even more satisfying. Karen was already in my yard when they pulled up, clutching her clipboard like it was a holy relic, and shouting something about my newly planted flower bed being a violation of Article 12. Of what? She never said. Probably her own personal rule book. She didn't even notice the police until one of them cleared his throat. She turned, startled, then tried to play it cool. "Oh good," she said, smiling like this was her idea. "Officers, thank you for coming. I need help dealing with this non-compliant resident." One of the cops tilted his head. "Actually, ma'am, we were called about you." That wiped the smug look right off her face. I handed them the court order. Fresh print, crisp edge, bold stamp from the county courthouse. It had everything: my name, my property line, and one very clear sentence. "This property is not subject to any HOA jurisdiction, formal or informal." They both read it carefully, flipping pages, nodding. Karen leaned in, trying to peek. "That's fake," she said. "I've seen people print off all kinds of things from the internet." The younger officer gave her a look. "This is an official court document." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Opened again. At this point, she looked like someone trying to reboot their operating system. "I've just been following the rules," she mumbled. "That's all. The community has standards." "Whose standards?" the officer asked. Before she could answer, her husband came storming out the front door like a dollar store mob boss. He had a pair of reading glasses in one hand and a glass of iced tea in the other. Real power move. "She's not the problem here," he barked. "She's enforcing what's always been enforced." The officers didn't even flinch. "Sir, is there a registered HOA operating on this property?" He hesitated. "Well, technically, not officially registered, but it functions like one. And, are you aware," the older cop said slowly, "that issuing fines and attempting to enforce rules without legal authority is considered harassment and potentially fraud?" Karen took a step back. I didn't know it had gone that far. You stepped onto his property. You ignored his legal documentation. You attempted to impose non-existent rules. That is that far," the officer replied. By then, we had an audience. A few neighbors had stepped onto their porches. One guy across the street brought out a lawn chair and a soda like it was a front row seat to the best show in town. Someone was filming on a phone. Karen's face turned red, then pale, then red again. "We'll need you to come with us for questioning," one officer said gently. "You're not under arrest at this moment, but we do need you to answer for your actions." She looked like she might faint. Her husband started yelling again. Something about ungrateful newcomers and destroying the culture of the neighborhood, whatever that meant. Karen tried one last time. "I'm just trying to keep the neighborhood nice." The officer shrugged. "That's fine, ma'am, but you don't get to break the law to do it." And just like that, they walked her toward the patrol car. She didn't scream or fight, just walked slowly, clipboard still in hand, eyes locked on the ground like maybe if she didn't look up, it wouldn't be real. Her husband stood frozen on the lawn, hands shaking, mouth twitching like he had more to say, but no idea how to say it. Me. I stood on my porch, arms folded, watching it unfold like a movie where, for once, the villain actually gets what's coming to them. The real plot twist wasn't that she got caught, it was that she never thought she could, and the best part, I didn't have to raise my voice once. Just showed them the truth. Black ink, white paper, slam dunk. It's wild how fast a neighborhood can change when the self-appointed sheriff gets hauled away in the back of a cruiser. One day, Karen's out front measuring lawn heights with her clipboard of doom. The next, her porch lights are off, the driveway's empty, and her precious HOA notices have mysteriously stopped appearing. People started talking. At first, just whispers. "Did you see the cops at Karen's? I thought she was the HOA. Wait, there's no HOA." It was like the whole street woke up from a long passive-aggressive nap. Some neighbors actually came over and thanked me. One guy said he'd been afraid to repaint his shutters for years because Karen claimed earth tones only. Another admitted he'd been paying her fake dues every month because she made it sound mandatory. Turns out, Karen had been running her little suburban scam for years. Fake fines, unofficial rule books, a whole HOA fantasy that existed solely in her mind and that god-awful binder she always carried. Her husband tried to do damage control, of course. He marched door to door with some sloppy apology/excuse letter, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and that Karen had only been trying to preserve community values. Yeah, no thanks. Nobody was buying it. Then came the real fallout. Karen got charged officially with trespassing, harassment, and impersonating a public official. Apparently, when you make up authority and use it to threaten people, that crosses a few legal lines. Her lawyer tried to spin it like she was just overzealous, but the judge didn't seem impressed by that defense, especially not after reviewing the dozens of photos, fake notices, and her glorious violation log, which was about as legally binding as a grocery list. Her husband filed a complaint against me for defamation and emotional distress. That got tossed faster than expired yogurt. The judge didn't even call me in, just looked at the paperwork and dismissed it like it was a prank. I mean, the guy tried to sue me for calling the cops on his wife trespassing on my property. Talk about Olympic-level delusion. With Karen out of commission and the fake HOA officially exposed. Something amazing happened. Peace. Actual peace. The kind where you can put out your trash cans early, plant tulips without surveillance, and park your car without someone snapping photos like they're with TMZ. I finally put up a little sign in my yard, private property, not part of any HOA, don't ask. Just for fun. I spent the next few weekends doing what I'd originally moved here to do: relax. I rebuilt my garden, repainted the fence in bright red, just because I could, and even hosted a cookout for the neighbors. Real HOA or not, community is something you build with kindness, not fear, and citations written in Comic Sans. The best part? One morning I walked outside, coffee in hand, and saw a moving truck in front of Karen's house. No fanfare. No announcement, just boxes and silence. The neighbor said they were downsizing, but I like to think she just got tired of living in the same neighborhood where everyone now saw through the clipboard act. Her house sat empty for a while. A realtor finally put up a sign. I smiled every time I walked past it. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing justice actually did something for once. No viral video, no courtroom drama. Just a simple truth backed by real paperwork, and the quiet satisfaction of watching a fake tyrant lose her throne. I still keep the court order framed in my home office, not because I need to gloat, but because it reminds me of something important. Sometimes, you don't have to shout to win. You just need to stand your ground, know your rights, and let the law do its thing. Karen once told me, I'm just following the rules. Too bad she forgot about the law. The first wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth just as Jacob asked the question they'd all been dancing around. Do we gotta leave when spring comes? His voice cracked on the last word, and Elias pretended not to notice the boy's white-knuckled grip on his whittling knife. Sarah's hand stilled over the bread dough she was kneading. The cabin went quiet enough to hear the creek laughing outside. Elias cleared his throat. Been thinking about adding on a room. He kept his eyes on the wooden duck he was carving, as if making casual conversation with the fireplace. Figured, you kids might want proper beds instead of pallets. Grace squealed and launched herself at Elias's knees like a tiny, joyful battering ram. Emily's serious face broke into the first unguarded smile he'd seen since the land agent came calling. And Jacob, that tough little survivor, blinked hard and fast, like he'd gotten dust in both eyes at once. That night, Elias found Sarah sitting by the creek, her bare toes skimming the moonlit water. You don't have to do this, she said softly, when he sat beside her. Know that? He picked up a flat stone, skipped it across the dark water. 3 jumps. Not bad for an old man, but the place could use more space. And I could use the help. Sarah laughed, the sound blending with the burbling creek. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Ilias's ears burned. Wasn't proposing, just stating facts. She bumped her shoulder against his, and they sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the peepers sing. By May, the new room took shape: rough pine walls that smelled like sunshine. 2 sturdy bunk beds Elias built with Jacob handing him. Nails like a surgeon's assistant. Sarah stitched curtains from flour sacks, while Emily painted wildflowers along the windowsill. Grace helped by getting more paint on herself than the wood. When the town festival flyer appeared at the Mercantile, Elias surprised everyone by tacking it to the cabin wall. "We're going," he announced, as if daring them to argue. Pine Creek's Spring Jubilee turned out to be equal parts county fair and community confessional. The Mercantile ladies cooed over Grace's curls. The blacksmith clapped Jacob on the back for winning the sack race. And even Doc Henderson raised an eyebrow at how Sarah's hand kept finding Ilias's sleeve in the crowd. "You Carters make a fine picture," Mrs. Pettigrew said as she handed Sarah a blue ribbon for her blackberry pie. Sarah opened her mouth to correct Hearth. They weren't Carters. Not really, but Ilias's calloused fingers found hers and squeezed. And maybe it was the golden afternoon light, or the way the children were laughing with town kids, as if they'd always belonged. But Sarah found herself squeezing back. That night, walking home with Grace, asleep in his arms, and fireflies lighting their path, Elias realized something peculiar. The hollow place inside him, the one he'd been feeding with solitude for years, didn't ache anymore. Sarah must have sensed it too, because when they reached the cabin's new porch built wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, she paused in the moonlight. "Elias, yeah, spring's here." He looked at their makeshift family, at Jacob trying to carry a sleeping Emily, at Grace's paint-stained fingers curled trustingly against his shirt hand. Understood what she wasn't saying. "Guess it is," he agreed, and held the door open for them all. The fireflies were putting on their best show of the summer when Elias finally worked up the nerve. He'd been carving the thing for weeks, sneaking glances at Sarah's hands while she sewed, measuring the span of her fingers when she slept. The heart-shaped box was far from perfect, one side slightly thicker than the other. The hinge a little stubborn, but it held the question he couldn't quite voice. Sarah sat on the porch steps shelling peas, the golden light of evening turning her work-worn hands luminous. The children were down by the creek, their laughter floating up through the pines. Elias cleared his throat 3 times before she looked up. "Elias Carter," she teased, "if you've got something to say, spit it out before you choke on it." He sank to one knee in the dirt, his bad joint protesting. The wooden heart felt suddenly ridiculous in his big hands. "Not much for speeches," he began, then froze when Sarah's breath caught. Inside the box lay 2 things: a sprig of wildflowers from their meadow, and a carefully folded slip of paper. Sarah opened it with trembling fingers to reveal a rough pencil sketch. The cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, 5 stick figures holding hands out front. "Thought we might make it official," Elias muttered, suddenly fascinated by a knot in the porch wood. "If you're inclined." Sarah's tears hit the paper before her laughter did. She launched herself at him with enough force to nearly topple them both, peas scattering across the yard like green confetti. "Yes, you impossible man, yes." The children came running at the commotion. Grace squealed and piled onto the hug, while Jacob whooped loud enough to startle the chickens. Only Emily hung back, her serious eyes studying Ilias's face. "Does this mean we get to call you Pa?" Ilias's throat closed up tighter than a rusted bear trap. He managed a nod, and that was all it took. Emily barreled into the fray, completing the tangle of arms and laughter and spilled peas. Their wedding was a simple affair, just the 5 of them in the sun-dappled meadow, with Doc Henderson presiding and Mrs. Pettigrew from the Mercantile insisting on tossing rice. Sarah wore her Sunday dress with wildflowers braided into her hair. Elias's hands shook so badly he could barely fasten his collar, until Jacob stepped in to help with a quiet, "Let me yay." When it came time to exchange tokens, Elias placed a carved wooden ring around Sarah's finger. Oak, sanded smooth as silk. Grows stronger with time, he whispered. Sarah answered by pressing a locket into his palm, one he'd seen her working on for weeks. Inside were 5 tiny portraits: her bright eyes, Jacob's stubborn chin, Emily's serious smile, Grace's dimples, and his own rough-hewn face, looking happier than he'd ever remembered. That night, as fireflies danced outside their window and the children's sleepy murmurs drifted from the new room, Elias lay awake, listening to Sarah's steady breathing. The old rocking chair, the one that had sat empty for so long, creaked softly in the corner. Now bearing a quilt Sarah had stitched from their worn-out clothes. Somewhere beyond the meadow, a wolf howled at the moon. Elias smiled into the dark, thinking how strange it was. The loneliest man in Pine Creek had somehow ended up with the fullest house. And as Sarah curled against him with a contented sigh, he realized he didn't miss the silence one bit.